and that up there. So we have got this in here. So Dema, because I probably would not pronounce her. All right. So, and she just told me too that she can't get the link to work on her phone. So she's going to join a little bit late. And Amanda, I don't have a bio on you. My apologies. We'll let you introduce yourself. So, but Dema has been with Community Crisis Intervention and Support Services at Huntsman Mental Health Institute for about 4 years. She works directly with clinical marketing and outreach teams for SafeUT National Guard, and SafeUT Frontline, which will kind of be what we're talking about today, as we're all frontline workers. As a counselor on the front lines of suicide prevention, as well as a supervisor of crisis workers on the front lines, Dema knows firsthand the importance of a support line for these workers. She currently facilitates a work group of administrators from healthcare, law enforcement, fire, and EMS to spread awareness of the SafeUT Frontline app, which I think is fantastic. And I'm going to stop share right now. Amanda, I don't know, do you have slides to share?
I do.
Okay, let me make you a co-host so we can get that going.
Great.
And that way you can go ahead, and if you want to, I'm sorry I didn't have a bio for you. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and we will get that going.
All right. Well, let's make sure that I share the correct screen. I usually work off of 3 different screens, so
that's fair.
Hopefully.
Perfect.
So my name is Amanda McNabb, and I am the Quality Improvement and Training Manager for our Community Crisis Department. So I am over all of our different programs, not just over the quality and clinical of SafeUT, but the national, it's the Utah State crisis line in conjunction with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So we are the affiliate here for Utah with the Lifeline. We are also the Warm Line, our mobile crisis outreach teams, and SafeUT, and then our Selfcare transitions program that actually does follow up with individuals who have been recently discharged from the inpatient setting. So, as Jamie said, Dema is going to be joining us shortly. She ran into some traffic issues this morning, so is kind of stuck. But really today, we wanted to remind you of the impact that you have as a member of the frontline field, as a member of the community in general, because as individuals, each of us has an impact on our friends, our family, strangers on the street who may be working towards some form of crisis situation. We can intervene without even knowing that we've intervened. We're also here to really support you in helping others and supporting others through both kind of your own self-care and by figuring out what's the best way to ask the questions that sometimes need to be asked. So to begin with, we really want to look at what is a crisis. What is the definition, and what are the signs? What are things that people look for in each other? So here's the official, an official definition of a crisis. Crisis is a perception of experience of an event or situation as intolerably difficult that exceeds the person's current resources and coping mechanisms. Basically, it's any time that an individual's normal level of functioning has been upset. So it could be something different for everybody. During a crisis, it can be considered a danger to the individual, so it can kind of activate that fight, flight, or freeze. If we think about what happens when somebody's adrenaline starts flowing, do we freeze and not move? Do we get ready to fight the situation, or do we run the other direction on things? It's also an opportunity for change, and change is scary. which is part of why our fight, flight, or freeze really can be triggered in those moments. So if we look at the brain, I was taught, look at a fist, right? You've got your neocortex, or that frontal lobe, that really is focused in on logic and putting things in the order that they need to go in, socially acceptable behaviors, being able to filter out outside pieces. So somebody who has ADHD may struggle a little bit more in processing or filtering in the frontal lobe, because they're paying attention to everything instead of just one thing. Inside, kind of where your palm is your limbic system, or your mammalian brain. And that's the part that really focuses in on your emotions. And a lot of times that is where a brain in crisis really can be active. It's kind of stuck in those emotional pieces and not able to function at a more logical and executive level. And then you have your reptilian brain, which is the part that does the instinctual. So the fight, flight, or freeze, it keeps our bodies breathing at times. Again, when adrenaline's happening, sometimes that breath gets dysregulated. And so we want to slow down the activity in that reptilian brain and be able to focus in more on the window of tolerance, being able to bring people down to where they can re-engage that frontal lobe. And this happens to all of us. So I want you to think it's not only just working with somebody else who might be experiencing crisis, but what is going on for ourselves when we are in crisis. So what does it look like? It looks like feelings of being out of control. It could be anger or hostility. Any of you have ever been taught anger is that umbrella that kind of hides other emotions? So it could be feelings of disappointment. It could be frustration with things. When I'm teaching our crisis intervention trainings to police officers, I often remind them of, think about a 2-year-old, right? 2-year-old, when they're having a tantrum, looks like the most angry person in the world. That's because they don't necessarily have the ability to express frustration, disappointment, all of those other feelings and emotions that go underneath. Same with a person in crisis, right? That middle brain is functioning and the emotions are there, but the language isn't there. We also have sadness or despair, right? The inability to find what brings happiness or joy in moments because we're focused in more on the negative. Anxiety or fear, right? Again, fight, flight, or freeze. We're being challenged in some way from our norm at that time. And people can really struggle with eating or sleeping, and that goes on kind of both sides of the pendulum. It could be overeating and oversleeping, or it could be not eating and not sleeping. And the same person with a different trigger to that crisis could go either way. So if it's something where you're feeling more depressed, maybe a death, then you may overeat and oversleep. And then the same person who is experiencing trauma from a car accident could be not sleeping and not eating. So it kind of looks both ways in the same individual. Come on, there we go. So I quickly just want to go over kind of the crisis cycle. So all of these different feelings and emotions start to build up. It isn't just a automatic, you go from 0 to 60. There's buildup that happens after something has been triggered, whatever that trigger may be for a crisis. If you can intervene before the full-blown crisis, So maybe just after the trigger or as things are starting to build up, there's a better opportunity to avoid some of the really negative and sometimes irreversible things that can happen when we hit that crisis point. And when I talk about irreversible, I am talking about suicidal ideation or suicide attempts. Other things can happen that are irreversible in a crisis. But really, since we're looking at suicide prevention, thinking about that as being kind of the biggest concern or the biggest crisis. So we have opportunities to build skills, to intervene beforehand. But once somebody hits that red zone, kind of that crisis area, their ability to process and create new skills, sometimes even utilize skills that they already have, becomes very, very difficult. Learning doesn't really happen in that area, even in the calm down area, because our bodies can only stay at a heightened crisis level for so long before there's some form of crash. And that's what we call that recovery period. Now, that doesn't mean that they will always come right back to baseline. It could mean that we go right back into crisis again, or build up to crisis. But the ability to really process through new information and create those coping skills is really impacted in those areas. So what about suicidal ideation? What are things that you can do if somebody that you care about, somebody that you work with, somebody on the street is dealing with thoughts about suicide? One of the biggest things that any of us can remember when emotions are running high is to breathe. We have to re-engage that frontal lobe. And one of the best ways to do that is to get oxygen into our bodies, to slow things down, be able to focus in for the moment on ourselves. Because if we're still in crisis ourselves, we can't help somebody else, right? We want to engage them in breathing. So on the crisis line and SafeUT, we often will encourage people to participate in breathing exercises with us. You know, we might say, I really want to help you with what's going on. I want to talk things through. But before we do, let's just breathe together for a minute. And we might do some square breathing where we actually try to have them imagine drawing a square, but breathing in for 4 seconds, holding it for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds. And you just keep going around the square. We'll also talk about using the senses. So what are 5 things you can see? 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, working through all of the different senses as a way of re-engaging that kind of analytical frontal lobe executive functioning piece. We want to model our calm voice, calm body. If we're really agitated ourselves, right, in person with that other individual, they're going to mirror our body language. I don't know if anybody's familiar with mirror neurons. They're the things that activate when we're playing with babies. You know, if you've ever held a baby and or looked at a baby and you smile, it smiles back. You coo, it coos back, right? It's mirroring us, it's learning. We do that as adults. When we have somebody who's very agitated, if you start talking softer, slower, calmer, a lot of times you'll see them start to mirror and de-escalate themselves in those moments. And really, when emotions are high, the biggest thing that we can do is listen. Listen to their story. Listen to what they're trying to say to us. Validate. We don't have to agree, but validate that they are experiencing something overwhelming and unusual for them. And that can be really difficult. We want to present options, even though they may not be options that somebody wants. At times we have to give choices that nobody would want to pick, right? You can go to the hospital or you can go to the receiving center, but those are your options. And at times, people are going to try to fight you. So being able to allow them the choice, but still maintain safety with that individual by presenting those options. Some things that people really experience when they're in crisis is feeling like they're trapped, that they lack the ability to make decisions or make choices. And so if we can provide them even small choices, it makes a very big difference for them. When we're talking about listening, we really want to remember that listening requires concentration and energy. It takes a lot to really hear what somebody else has to say. It involves connection with that individual, whether that's a connection that is temporary, just in that moment. So right now, all of you hopefully are creating some sort of connection while listening to what I have to say, but it's a temporary connection and it's not a very deep connection because I don't know you. We're not having a conversation back and forth, but there has to be something in order to hear the message that I'm trying to say. It includes a desire to see things from another person's perspective without judgment. If somebody tells you that they are being tracked by, I don't know, terrorist forces, right? This is a call that we got recently for an individual that our mobile crisis outreach team needed to go out and see. And was he? Probably not. In his world, that was his reality. And so I'm not going to sit there and argue. That's a waste of time. But I'm going to say, wow, that must be really difficult. Tell me more about what's happening to you. What are you experiencing? And then hopefully we can come to some sort of solution or support for that individual. When we are the ones in crisis, a lot of times we feel like people aren't listening to us. And it may be that we're talking to a friend or family member who really does want to hear us and support us, but they don't know how to be supportive or to express that they're hearing what we have to say. And that can be really upsetting to us because we feel like we're being invalidated or we're not having the connection that we need in that moment. So when we can get back to more logical thought process, a lot of times we can go, oh, they were trying to listen. And the graph on the side here is just the components of communication. So body language actually makes up 55% of our communication. Our tone of voice, the sound that we make, some of those nonverbal utterances of oh, things like that are 38%. The words are only 7%. So imagine with SafeUT, which we're going to talk about more in just a minute, where it is words on a screen. You're texting with somebody. Anybody ever have a text conversation and all of a sudden you realize that somebody took something really out of context? And you're like, no, that's not what I meant, right? That can happen when all we have is words. And so we have to be very careful sometimes about our words when we don't have those other areas. When we have tone of voice, body language, things like that, we can do a much better job of relaying validation. So our team has had to get really good at figuring out how to relay validation, support, and genuineness with just words. So if someone is expressing suicidal ideation, we really want you to remember that if you think something is wrong, trust your judgment, right? You could be wrong, but that's okay because it's coming from an I care place. And you can say, wow, I misunderstood, or thanks for clarifying, that really helps. Most people are not going to be angry and hold a grudge and stay that way for a really, really long time because you misinterpreted their feelings, thinking that they might be suicidal. We want to take it seriously, even if you think it's a cry for attention. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But remember that this could be the 30th time that this person has said, I'm feeling suicidal, I want to kill myself. This could be the one time that they actually go forward with a plan or an attempt. It's okay to express your concern. It's also okay to ask direct questions. And that's something that a lot of people really struggle with, is the idea that if I were to say to somebody, have you been having thoughts about suicide? It's going to implant an idea. You know, we can't do that. If somebody has been thinking about suicide or says, yes, I've been having thoughts about suicide, it's been there for a while. It may be more on the subconscious level, and so it may not be something that they jump at answering right away. They may not feel comfortable answering at that moment, but it's okay to ask it. And it's okay to express your concern that, you know, I'm really worried about you. Here are the things that I'm seeing. Because most people, unless you give them evidence, will go, no, no, not me, not me, and kind of blow you off. But that concern is coming from a genuine place. And if you can verbalize what that place is, it can be helpful for other people to see that. We want to really use our active listening and reflection. What I heard you say is that correct? It's that connection piece again, because maybe you're the first person who's ever said, I hear you. Sometimes the wording I hear you can be helpful and sometimes it can't. You know, hopefully you've been able to ask some questions to and make some statements for that person to really feel like you are creating connection. A lot of people that I've talked to really hate when somebody says, I know how you feel. It's triggering for them of, how do you know how I feel? You're not me, right? But what about, that sounds really difficult. Tell me more, right? That here's, I can kind of hear what you're saying and I'm trying to gain more insight into what's going on for you. I can empathize with that because I've been through something really difficult myself. And I can kind of imagine what this has been like for you. So validating that information, those emotions that are going on. When we can, we want to ensure safety and not leave them alone if possible. Now, if somebody's saying I have suicidal ideation, but it's passive, I'm not going to do anything, that's a little bit different than somebody says, I have a plan, I have intent, I have means, and if you walk away from me, I'm going to act on it. Right? Those are the situations where we're not going to leave them alone. We're going to keep somebody, doesn't necessarily have to be you, but somebody connected to them while we get other support systems involved. When we ourselves are feeling maybe an increase in crisis and maybe starting to feel some suicidal thoughts, it's really important that we seek out somebody else. Hopefully, we have somebody that we recognize as a support system. But if we don't, there are all sorts of other supports available. And so those are things that maybe we need to have written down. Because again, our kind of logical side isn't really thinking, and we may not remember. You know, one of the big things right now that we're working towards is a 3-digit crisis number. So instead of having to remember 1-800-273-TALK or 801-587-3000, all people have to remember is 988. Just like 911, 988. And across the nation, people will get connected with their local mental health crisis team. Here in Utah, it'll be the center that, or the department that Dema and I work for. Other areas have their own centers that people will get connected to and be able to talk with somebody 24/7. We are always here. And we are a support system. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those other support systems in just a moment. But one of the things that I really wanted to look at are what are the 4 basic questions that if we have somebody who we feel like might be dealing with some suicidal thoughts, what are the 4 questions that we want to gain answers to? So are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? Because harming yourself may be other things. It could be cutting or some form of non-suicidal self-injury. It could be, I feel like banging my head against the wall. Okay, well, is that an expression or do you really want to go bang your head against the wall? Are you thinking about suicide? Have you thought about suicide in the last 2 months? And have you ever attempted to kill yourself? Thinking about suicide on a passive level versus having active suicidal thoughts in the last 2 months versus I have a history of making attempts. They're all red flags, but they kind of go, well, they're a little out of order. Suicidal thoughts within the last 2 months is a red flag, but it's kind of like, okay, so what's going on today though? And then thinking about suicide in the last 24 hours. Okay, that's a bigger issue. And then have you ever attempted to kill yourself? That's going to be, okay, we definitely need to look at this piece if thinking about suicide today is a yes. These are really the 4 basic questions that we use to begin an assessment. And then once we get a yes really to any of those, we go in a little bit deeper dive into what's happening, what's going on today. Why did they call? Why did they reach out to the crisis department to see what's going on? So there is a form of training called ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And it's usually about a 2-day training. It is meant specifically for non-clinicians. So it can be a little basic for some of us that have more experience with talking to individuals in crisis. But one of the great things that it teaches are the 3 areas of connection, understanding choices, and assisting, what they call assisting life. But basically it's your safety planning and putting things into action. So those 4 basic brief assessment questions don't necessarily have to be, let me ask you these 4 questions. Boom, 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 right? Once you make connection with somebody, you start to get invitations into being able to ask those questions or look for the answers without even having to ask. If somebody says, I'm really struggling, I'm having thoughts about suicide, I don't need to go back and say, are you having thoughts about suicide? Because I just answered it. And if I were to ask, it's going to invalidate and make them feel terrible because I'm not listening to what they have to say. We're listening to their story. We're looking for what they call turning points in ASSIST. What are the things that show that this person might have ambivalence? What are the areas that we can build off of that would create safety or maybe switch the path that the brain is going at that moment? And then creating some sort of action or some sort of plan of action in order to provide a little bit of a safety net for that individual and for yourself, because sometimes we are our own clients and it makes it harder because we're often the most stubborn of clients. And trying to argue with yourself usually doesn't work so well. But being able to recognize, okay, I'm at a moment where I need to step out of myself and maybe get a third party who doesn't know the situation very well and just get that outside perspective of things. So assist is something that is out there, just like QPR, which I can never remember what it stands for, but there are different programs that people can participate in to learn more about suicide intervention and skills. One of the questions that often will come up as well is, what if you think that it's attention seeking? It's at times a possibility, but why? What is it that they are trying to get out of it? Everything we do as human beings is trying to get a need met. Whether we are somebody who is a giver, who will sacrifice themselves, skipping meals while on duty, not taking breaks, working straight through. Those are behaviors that are meeting a need. And maybe that need is to be needed by somebody. Maybe that need is something that we don't know, we can't recognize because it's buried really deep. But if somebody is expressing suicidal ideation, there's a need that's going on. It could be attention seeking. But what is it about negative attention? Because I wouldn't necessarily consider it positive attention that individual is looking for, and learned that if they say, I'm feeling suicidal, they are going to get. It's possible that that is the only way this individual knows how to express their emotions and their needs. So we have a young lady who uses SafeUT. She is in her early 20s. We actually haven't heard from her for a little bit, but she is working on a cognitive level of probably, I would say, a 10 to 12-year-old. And her way of getting her needs met for connection and attention is to say, I'm suicidal. I'm drinking bleach. I'm going to go to the park and hang myself. Oftentimes she's doing this on SafeUT texting while sitting next to somebody from her family watching a movie, or she's bored in her room. Because what she's learned is, if I say that I'm suicidal and I'm not willing to go try something different, then people will send the police over, and the police are really nice to me and they talk to me for a while and they treat me nicely. So it's very possible for this young lady to intervene in a different way. We're going to take it seriously, but are we going to jump to calling the police every time? No. Are we going to seek out ways to connect with family members or her treatment team or things like that in order to get her other resources and skills? Attention seeking can also be a perception related to burnout or things that are coming out of our personal lives. Anybody ever dealt with somebody who has a specific personality diagnosis? Makes it really, really hard to work with that person, especially when we're dealing with very needy individuals within our family or friends, or even other patients, other individuals that we're working with. We're going to perceive things differently than we might if we were well rested and had 3 years off of work and are coming back in fresh and new, you know, that perception really can change based on the moment as well. So one of the big things that we have to teach our staff here in the crisis department is to look at, am I feeling burnt out today? I'm sure you have all heard everything there is about self-care and burnout and all of those different pieces. And you're going to get a little bit of that from us as well today. But knowing that if that's what you're experiencing, it's going to eke out. So we have to be a little more vigilant about recognizing and taking care of those things. And that's why it kind of gets harped upon all the time in our fields of, you know, you got to take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, how can you take care of others? So I'm going to throw it over to Dema to talk about combating burnout. And I'm going to continue to control the slides if that's okay. So Dema, you just tell me when you need me to switch through. But hopefully she can give you a little more information about burnout and about our SafeUT Frontline app.
Great, thanks so much, Amanda. It's lovely to be here with you all, and I'll just give you kind of a minute stretch break during this transition, or whatever you need to do to, you know, take a break. I know it can be hard to sit for an hour. I missed the introductions, so I'll just reintroduce myself. I'm Dema Allerton. I'm the SafeUT supervisor. And Jamie and I talked about how to present some of these topics in a meaningful way. And we had a really great discussion that I really, Jamie, want to pivot off of as I talk, because I think some of the themes we discussed were really universal to everyone at this point, just as healthcare workers, as frontline workers, and as people who have been through a crazy almost 2 years now, with everything that's going on in our world. So I'll probably ask you to do some comments in the chat, or just raise your hands, or feel free to comment. So prepare for that if needed. You know, if you're across the room from your computer and you want to participate, just, I'm giving you a little bit of a heads up. So when we talked about what we would present today, we talked about, well, you know, what are the things that we always hear, especially lately. We always hear about burnout. And one of the things that I think was a challenge was, you know, how do we present on suicide prevention and just the app without, you know, kind of being trite, because I know how many times this group has probably heard about self-care, burnout, here's the tools, here's what you do. And so I kind of wanted to ask a few introspective questions. And I know I think we've got about 15 minutes, right, Jamie? Okay. So just want to spend the last few minutes asking you to be a bit introspective, and bear with me, because a lot of this is just coming from what I've observed personally as a frontline worker, and then also what I've observed in the folks that I work with on SafeUT. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Frontline app, just real practical terms of how to use it and that sort of thing. So I would like to ask you to reflect on the question and then put in the chat if you'd like, or just comment. But first of all, tell me what you do, like what is your role and why are you doing it? So what is your role and why are you doing it?
Dem, as you say that, I'm putting up the poll results so you can also kind of see that we have mostly nurses and some EMTs, paramedics today.
Awesome.
Most of them not familiar or somewhat familiar, or, you know, a little familiar with the app.
Perfect. That's so helpful. Thank you. So why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you a nurse? Why are you an EMT worker? Awesome. Help people, good schedule, good work-life balance, helping people. I definitely have been staying in this field for similar reasons. I like helping people. I like, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. I like the crisis, mindset, and I like feeling like I can quickly solve a problem. Help people get needed services, helping people, honestly, the rush. There you go, Darren, adrenaline junkie. So we like helping people. Feel free to continue to share your comments as we talk. We like helping people. This past year with COVID gave us some unprecedented opportunities, I think, to do this, right? Awesome. Amanda's presentation about burnout and the effect of patient care was right on. Agreed. So we like helping people. Let's talk about kind of the loss of meaning and purpose that many of us have experienced during this past 2 years. There's been something called the Great Resignation. I don't know if you've all heard about that, but there has been just a massive amount of folks across the country who have quit their jobs and gone to something else. And there are a lot of reasons why. And some of the common themes that people have talked about have been just that the pandemic and some of the social justice issues that have come up have really just made people think twice about what they're doing and how they're spending their time, and and their limited resources of their life. So a lot of people are leaving jobs for something that will give them more flexibility, more work-life balance, that kind of thing. And so I bring this up because I really do want you all to know we care about you as individuals. We're all in this together, and it's been challenging, and it's been an opportunity of growth for a lot of people to just ask, what is my meaning? What is my purpose? And especially in this job, right? As Jamie and I talked, we kind of had some insights that we know about burnout, we know about self-care, we may or may not be dealing with it well, for whatever reasons. And we just want to know how to do our jobs better and how to help people better, right? Because we're kind of that kind of person. So I would propose and suggest a refocus on meaning and purpose, not just in your job, but in your life. Because we really know that everything is connected. Amanda's got a great video. I totally forgot about this video, so I'll pause and we can play this video. He says it much better than I can.
I hope I can play the video. Don't be this way, video.
If we don't get it up, it's worth the Google search to look at.
I can drop it in because it's being mean to me today.
Yeah, drop
So
the link in the chat and we can all watch it.
I will, for sure. Simon Sinek, however you say his last name, has a lot of great videos on YouTube. This is just a quick short one. It's actually a little bit of a pitch, so ignore the pitch part, but I will drop that in right now.
So some of these questions, what is your why? Just take a minute or two. I want you to reflect on these and feel free to share, feel free to put in the chat. These are really good questions to ask. I know 2 minutes isn't enough time, but just to get you started and thinking about what is your why, it's so important to revisit that. And think about it, our why a lot of times is, what we said before, helping people. But what, in addition to that, like, these questions are really helpful to think of. How do you measure your life? Where do you add the greatest value? What are your strengths? Feel free to just kind of let those questions percolate. One really great resource that I won't have time to go over, but I'll also drop here, is actually created by Tony Tsai in the, I think he's in the business School of Business. I could be wrong with the U. But he created a series on life transitions. And I hope that link, I don't know if that link is working for folks, but I'll see if I can get a working link. But it's really just about thinking of life's transitions in seasons. So a season of letting go, right? Like the fall, leaves are falling, dying, things are changing. That can be hard for us to kind of go through. A season of winter where, the trees are dead, there's snow, it's cold. That's a time to create space. That's a time to really pause, kind of refrain from impulsively trying to find new activities, but really just create routines and slowness and space. And then spring, season 3, a new beginning, starting, kind of activating after you've asked yourself these why questions. Who can I reconnect with? What new things can I do to, kind of stimulate again that desire and that passion that I maybe once had and maybe am kind of feeling like I've lost it. So I don't know if it doesn't look like it's clickable to me in the chat. Is anyone able to? Okay, I might just email Jamie and share that link. But just with the short time we had, and it's a bit of an incomplete thought, but really just want to talk to you all about, think about you, not so much in terms of, okay, what are 5 coping skills, or how do I deal with burnout in this, really linear step-by-step process, but think about some of those deeper life transition questions of, who am I? Where am I going? How am I going to make an impact in this life? What do I want to be remembered as? How do I want to be remembered? That kind of thing. Because that's going to help you re-engage and find that passion again. And, maybe you've already been doing that. But I would really encourage you to just kind of look around you, if you feel like, hey, I'm in a good spot, I've got the passion going, I have my purpose in my work and my personal life. Look around you at, your colleagues, people around you, and kind of help them find that light and reignite that again. Probably a very high likelihood that people around you are struggling with these very questions. Just as we're seeing throughout our country, throughout our state, throughout the U, that folks are really just in those transition periods of life where, it can be a good thing. It can be a good season to change and to pause. But it just takes recognizing that it's something that's, it's not permanent, but it's something to really not try to run away from mentally or emotionally. So I hope that was somewhat helpful, if not, just my own personal musings on the state of things right now. So I'll talk in the last couple minutes about SafeUT Frontline. So the confidential 24/7, 365 app that is handled by master's level counselors and social workers. And this was created for healthcare providers, fire, EMS, dispatch, and law enforcement, specifically because leaders in these areas have, always known that there's support that's needed, right? But that isn't always available very easily and quickly to these folks. And so during the pandemic, there was just such an obvious need, and it seemed like such a perfect time to just say, hey, we really need to do something, and we need to do something fast. So next slide, please. This app was just created with that in mind. One of the things that has changed from the SafeUT K through higher ed app and Frontline app is the tip feature. So in schools, people can report suspicious activity or concerning activity of other people. School shootings, suicidal thoughts, kids smoking in the bathroom, that kind of thing. With adults, we realized, especially in this field, just that the high fear and the fact that many of us in these careers do face significant challenges for reaching out for help and for having mental health issues specifically. We know there are a lot of barriers systemically and lots of stigma. And we didn't want this to be something where, people felt like their careers would get ruined if someone reported, hey, I saw so-and-so, acting a little concerning. So we took the tip feature off. So it really is very different and confidential, at even a higher level than maybe the K through higher ed. You can still text in and say, hey, I got a coworker I'm a little worried about, but we're not going to report them. We'll just give you some ideas of how to help. All of our counselors are receiving and have received training on specific needs of frontline healthcare workers, law enforcement, fire, all of the groups. So that they're not just going to be a generalist that doesn't really know what you're talking about or how to help you. So some of the things we provide are listed here, just no cost access to a licensed master's level counselor, social worker. We help give you support, validation, problem solving, really work on just better mental fitness in general. And that's it. I see we're wrapping up on time, so I'll just kind of end there.
You can keep going a little bit. We can let people stay.
Okay.
And I just want to launch the poll for those that do need to leave at 12:30.
Okay.
Please feel free to take your time and go ahead and finish up.
Well, I think really what we want to get out is we've got this app designed for you specifically. So, in between shifts, or you're on a shift and something is happening and you just need that quick 10-15 minutes of pause and someone to just kind of vent to, work out some of the situations that are going on in your mind, just shoot us a text. It's a real person. We answer under 2 minutes. And we really are just there to say, oh, hey, yeah, I'll help you through this moment. You don't have to be in a suicidal crisis. You can just be stressed out, or you could just be worried or sad or lonely. And you can also text about, a situation that's happening for somebody else. Hey, someone else is struggling and it's impacting me, or someone else is struggling and I don't know how to help them. What can I do? We're here for, we say, any size crisis, anytime. So please use us. Please download and check it out. So that's it.
Yeah, and so the code for the CME credit, somebody just put that, you'll actually get a completion certificate. So this is not a code. You just get the completion certificate. But if any of you guys have any questions for Amanda or for Dema, please go ahead, come off mute, go ahead and ask them, put them in the chat. I do want to take the time. It is very, very near and dear to my heart that my colleagues stay safe. As someone who has lost a colleague to suicide before, I just want to make sure that everybody is familiar with this, can use it. We all kind of, those tips and tricks to work with our patients or our clients, whatever you're working with. I think we all have the basis of that. I always think it's good to have reminders and new tips and tricks, but I want all of you guys to be safe. So if you have any questions, again, please put them in the chat, come off mute, whatever you would like. Looks like someone just downloaded the app. So other states able to access SafeUT, so Melissa's from Wyoming, or do you know of a Wyoming resource? Do they have something similar?
Yeah, so Wyoming does have a tip line, but in terms of like just support, we're pretty unique in the country. You can download and access the app from anywhere. It's legislated for Utah frontline workers, but we're not going to turn anybody away. So.
And please feel free to download and just send in a test tip, or not a tip, a test chat. You know, our staff is always happy, especially if you say this is a test, to respond back and answer questions and things like that as well. So we actually get a lot of therapists that will have people download while they're in a session and just send in a message that says, hey, just checking this out. So they could see that we're actually real people and not robots that are responding, and how quickly that we try to respond to people. So always feel free to kind of reach out and just say hi.
All right, have a lot of thank yous, but I want to thank both of you for joining us today, for helping with this. Again, I think it's a really important app. I think it's important that the frontline workers have resources. We're really good at referring other people to resources. We're not so good at referring ourselves to resources. So I appreciate both your time and effort with this. So thank you so much for joining today.
Well, thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. And for all the rest of you guys, again, this recording will be available on our YouTube playlist. And again, because I'm going to Disney World, I'll have it up by the end of the week. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.